Hi, it's Trace from Purple KATZ Quilting. Welcome to the KATZ Creative Studio here in Rimbey, Alberta, Canada. And today we are going to talk about the Cocoon Dress pattern. The Cocoon Dress pattern is from Simple Sew from the UK, and I want to show you my gallery of dresses. So I have 13 dresses that I've made so far with this pattern. I've been making these dresses since for the last 3 years. I have them in all of my favorite quilting cottons. I have some voile here, some Tula Pink voile. I used a panel print, Tula Pink flannel, which is just so cozy, and a couple feature prints, and then my Halloween dresses right there. So we have the Cocoon Dress pattern available on our website, and I'm going to be breaking it down into steps to make it easy for you to learn how to sew your dress if it's your first time, give you tips and tricks on making a garment. So see you soon. Now we're going to break down the pattern. Here's the Cocoon Dress pattern. What I love about this pattern is it comes in many sizes all in one pattern. So you'll get the package and it will have the instructions and the pattern, which I've got laid out here. So I'm just going to show you. On the back of the pattern, it talks about the finished size of the garment. That means that all the ease is built in. When you make something, you don't want it fitting really tight on your body. You want to be able to move your arms. You want to be able to sit down in a chair with a dress like this. So we're going to talk about the most important thing, and that's making a test pattern somehow out of an old sheet, or I'm going to use pattern-ease here, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But you need to make a test to make sure it fits. It doesn't matter what size you cut, you need to take your measurements, and when you go inside the pattern, there'll be a size chart, and it has your bust, your waist, and your hip measurement. You want to pick the measurement that's closest to the pattern. If you're in between, I suggest you go up because you want that little bit of ease. And if it's too big, you can always narrow the seams a little bit. Plus, when you wash these dresses, I always wash my dresses on cold and hang them to dry. Seriously, you just give them a good shake after you wash them, put them on a hanger, and you don't even have to press them. I love that about the cotton. It is just so comfy. So check the finished garment measurements. You want ease. You want at least 4 inches of ease around your hips. Here, your size chart is in the pattern. So in the pattern, they've got some layout views for the different fabrics here, how to lay it out. We'll talk about that in a minute. What I like to do, so you're going to take your measurements, you're going to go to your pattern, you're going to decide what size you're going to cut. I cut a 16, that's what I make. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use pattern-ease. Now we sell pattern-ease. It's actually an old product that's been used for years and years to trace your patterns onto. For a few years ago, we started using it for collage quilting. Laura Heine builds her whole collage on pattern-ease. It's kind of a woven fabric. It's not fabric, it's like paper. It's kind of a cross. It doesn't tear easily. So I'm going to show you what that's like. Here we have our pattern, and our pattern comes out of the package and it's on tissue paper. So it tears very easily. So that's why I'm going to trace the pattern onto my pattern-ease. See, look at this, is nice sturdy stuff. I can make like 13 dresses with just this one pattern. I can fold this one up and put it back in my pattern envelope and save it in case someday I want to make a different size or whatever. So I trace it onto pattern-ease. So I'm just going to show you, I've traced a few pieces here, and I always write my name on it and what size I've traced, because then I can remember when I pull it out, oh yeah, I was a size 16 last year. I better take my measurements again just to make sure my dress is going to fit me. So what I did is I laid the pattern-ease on the pattern, and we're going to transfer all of the markings, and I just use a pen and a ruler. So here's my 16 marking, and so I traced all along the edge here. When I get to a straight line, I actually use a ruler because it makes it really easy to trace. I'm going to put my notches on my pattern. Any kind of markings that are on a pattern are really, really important for when you start putting things together. So it's good to have it marked onto your pattern. There's a notch here, there's a this here, I actually drew the pocket on here. You're going to have a stitch line where you come down the side and you stitch to there, and then you go around and stitch. That's how easy it is. There's two main pieces in this pattern, the back and the front. The back is placed on fold, so I'm going to mark that, and I'm going to make sure. I am actually doing 2 layers. I've got it on fold, and I want to show you how you can use this pattern ease to be your test pattern before you cut out all your expensive pretty fabric. If you use this and use a basting seam and stitch it, make sure you can pull it over your head. One thing about this pattern is it's called a cocoon. It's wide here and it comes in at the bottom. So you can see on the pattern, it's wide here and it comes in at the bottom. If you have ample hips, maybe that's not going to work for you. I know that I made one for Courtney when she was expecting, and all we did was modify the pattern. If you can just come down here, Mr. KATZ. We modified the pattern by just making this a straight line from the pockets down to there. So I just traced it open. And the other thing again, so if you think that you might need that, or you can draw that in and cut it out a little bit bigger. That's just a little trick that we learned, because you want to be able to fit it, and it comes over your head. It is tight going over my hips, but then that's what I like, is it comes in at the bottom and it gives the dress just a really nice shape. So the most important thing is you want to make a test. If you don't use pattern ease, you could use an old sheet, some old fabric, some old plain cotton fabric. I had old flannel sheets that I saved for this. You just quickly trace it out, stitch it together, make a test, make sure it fits you before you cut your pretty fabric. So we'll come back. I'm going to trace this out. I'm going to show you a picture of how I've got it sewed together, and we'll move on to the next step. Now we've got our pattern copied onto our pattern ease, and we are going to cut it out. So I use sharp scissors. I love these beautiful scissors from LDH Scissors. There's 9.5-inch shears, fabric shears. They're just lovely. So I'm cutting out my pattern, and remember I laid it on the fold. Remember I talked about making a pattern test to see if it's going to fit. So this is my pattern. This is the back of my dress. I make sure I label them, especially if you're new. It makes it just easier. I've got my back of my dress, and I've got the front of my dress. So I'm going to put them just like I would sew them, right sides together. I'm just going to do a rough, this is what I call a rough guess, right? A pattern test. I just want to make sure it's going to go over my head, fit over my hips. So all the seam allowances on this pattern are at 5/8. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pins and I'm going to pin it at the shoulders on both sides. And then I'm going to pin it down the side. And I could either base this pattern piece with a long stitch on my sewing machine. That'll come out easy. Or if I'm not afraid of the pins poking me, I could just slip it over my head. So it depends on how snug it's going to be. But I'm going to pin at the top and at the sides. And so if you're doing this with the cotton and you're just testing it, like an old sheet or something, and you just pin it like that. There's my dress, right? There's my dress. But I haven't used my expensive fabric to see if it's going to fit me yet. So I'll just pull that over my head, make sure it fits. If I need to make it a little bit bigger, you can do that. If you need to maybe bring it in a little bit, that will give you a better choice. So that's how we do that. Now we're moving on to laying out the pattern pieces onto your fabric. Your pattern cover tells you how much fabric you need. I always buy a little bit more. It's the way I quilt, it's the way I sew, buy a little bit more fabric. So we've got our pattern pieces on our pattern ease. The layout instructions are here. Most of the fabric that we're using for quilting cotton is 45 inches wide, so that's why you need a little bit more fabric. If you've got wider fabric, it also tells you how to lay it out there. But I'm going to show you how to lay it out on non-directional print first. So I've got these beautiful tulip pink polka dots here, and I've got the front laid out and I've got it pinned. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to cut it out with those great big fabric shears just around the edge of the pattern. And I'm going to leave the pattern piece pinned to it so that I know front and back and everything. So I'm just going to show you real quick. See these big shears, how they just cut so nice. I have sometimes used my rotary cutter on my cutting board. I could do that too. I'm just cutting it out. So I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to show you now how I did that. Of course, I'm using a bolt of fabric because I have that luxury here. And if you have a long table, I used to always sew in my kitchen, on my kitchen counter in the evenings. That's where I used to sew. Just grab my pattern piece off the floor. This is my back. So I know that the center has to go on the fold. So I will put it on the fold, and I'm going to show you an easier way of doing this, actually. My friend Terry Rowland made me these beautiful fabric weights, pattern weights. Look at that. I don't have to pin. I just put them on. I'm going to quickly cut them out with my shears. And I know she labeled them. These are called Pattern Weights by Professor Pincushion. So there you go. There's something you can go and check out. So now I've got my back. I've got my fold along the fold of the fabric. And see how those hold it down from moving? Quick and easy. I would keep these clipped together. I would fold them together and just set them to the side together with the pattern piece, because the next thing that we're going to do is transfer those markings on. Okay, we'll talk about using the straight grain of fabric. That's one of the markings on some of your pattern pieces. When you lay it on fold, it automatically goes on the straight grain because it's folded and the selvagers are even. I'm decided that I'm going to make the sleeves on this, so I'm going to make view A, and I'm going to make the sleeves in the black and white tulip pink stripes. So that'll look really cool. I want my stripes to go down my arm like this. So then again, that's where you pay attention to directional prints. I don't want them going this way. I want them to go down. So I've got my fabric laid out. On my pattern piece, there's a line that says straight grain. That's really, really important, not only for using for stripes, but for any fabric. When you have something that's on the straight of grain, it'll hang properly. If you've seen a skirt that maybe is kind of wonky at the bottom, it usually has been made in a factory or something. It's not made with straight of grain. So straight of grain means that I want this line on my pattern piece to be the exact same distance from either the selvage or my fold. So traditionally we use the selvage. I'm going to use the fold, and actually with these stripes I'm going to make sure my straight grain line is right lined up on the stripes on the back and the front. So I probably would have to cut these separate. I know that it's nice and smooth, so I am going to cut it. So I would just put my fabric weights on, cut around, and that would be on straight grain. So the other pattern piece that says straight grain is your pocket, and there's a line there. So again, I'm just going to make sure I either measure that line from my fold, so it's exactly the same amount at this end of the arrow as at this end. So that's what grain of fabric and straight grain is. The other thing that you do after you've cut out your pattern pieces is you're just going to transfer the markings on. And those are just really important for when you start constructing your pattern. So on this pattern piece, there are notches and there are little dots for my pockets. So I'm going to transfer those onto the wrong side of the fabric. And for the notches, I'm actually just going to take my scissors and snip, 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 snip a 1/4 inch in. I'm going to make that little notch. You can see that there. Right there, see that notch? I made it. And the other thing that I want to do is my dot is just going to go on my pattern piece right there. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, excuse me, is interfacing. We do need interfacing. I'm using SF101. Interfacing goes on the back of the two pieces that we use in the collar here. And if I didn't put interfacing on them, they would roll and curl the fabric. I put the interfacing on. It's a stabilizer, and it's ironed on to the back of the fabric. So I'll show you how to do that, but here's my SF101. I've got my folds placed here. I'm gonna cut one of each of these. This is the front, this is the back. I will also cut one of these out of my fabric, and then I'll show you how to fuse those on and sew those together in the next step. Okay, so now we're going to talk about modifications for using fabric that's printed different. I showed you how if you have a non-directional print, you just place your pattern piece on the fold. But some of Tula Pink's fabrics are printed different. So if I were to put this on the fold, I just want you to see that my deer would be laying on their side. And I wouldn't be happy with that. So now I have to think about where the top of my fabric is and where the top of my dress is. So that's really important. So I've already got it laid out. What I've done in the past, that's how I made that print using the panel, the Aurora panel, is I used that's directional print, right? There's the top, and I used the panel with the border around the bottom. I laid it out just like this, and I just want to show you. What I did is I bought 2 meters of fabric, and that made my size 16. I turned the fabric around. So just a second here. My table seems really big till I start doing things. So what I did is I took the 2 meters. There's the fold. There's where the deer are. But what I did is I laid it out full, and now I folded it. So here's my fold that I'm going to use for my pattern piece, but now my deer are going this way. Now it's going to look, the deer are going to be up and down on my dress. That's what I want. So think about top of the pattern, top of the design, and that's how I'm going to lay it out and cut it. So that's the front. So I would just put my things on there. I would pin it. Then I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. I'm going to fold it over like that, make my fold, lay my pattern piece on the fold, and cut it out. And I'm going to be paying attention to where the top of my shoulders are, you know, lots of details with the pattern, something that you'll pick up. And then the rest of the fabric in the inside would be cut for the pockets, for the facings. So that's how I do that. All right, now comes the fun part. We get to put this dress together. You're going to be just so happy with how quick it goes together. It is a simple, beginner-friendly pattern. So, reading the pattern. I always like to go over the pattern. I like to teach you how to read the pattern. I don't want to tell you how to do everything. So step number 1 is to take your 2 front panels now, and I've already done this. You put them right sides together. You sew down the front. You press it open. Now we have to think about fabric. Cotton fabric can fray. A few of my dresses I used a serge seam. I've started using my pinking shears to give a nice edge finish here. What that does is it just prevents it from fraying, just like instead of a straight edge. So what I did is I pink sheared, and then I also stitched just inside the seam allowance. I just did a straight stitch. That's an old trick from back making garments. Before we had sergers, back in the 70s when I learned how to sew, we just used pinking shears and then a straight stitch. So that's how I finished all of my edges, just so that it helps prevent them from fraying. So the first step in the pattern is to sew your front seam, press it open. Remember to finish those raw edges. Then the next step is to sew the back to the front at the shoulders, which is what we kind of did already with the mock-up, our test pattern. So we sew the front to the back. Then we're going to take our facing. Remember those 2 facings, and we attach the interfacing, that's that white fusible. It just attaches with the iron. Then we sew them together at the shoulders, and this is actually going to be the facing for our collar. That's how that works. So we are going to attach it now to our dress. So right sides together, and we match the front point seam and the corner seams with pins, and then we take it over to the sewing machine. And most of the seam allowances in this pattern are 5/8, but there's a few seam allowance where it says 1 centimeter, which is about 3/8 of an inch. So you're going to want to pay attention to the seam allowances. If it tells you a different seam allowance, you need to use that. The one at the neck where we sew the facing on is a smaller seam allowance because it allows us to get a nice good seam, because now we're going to sew this here and we're going to flip it around. So we'll be right back. Okay, now we're going to trim our facing seam. Again, I like to use my pinking shears. It gives a nice close edge clip. You want to make sure you clip close to the seam as outlined in the pattern, but you don't clip your seam. So here's what my facing seam looks like at the back. So you can see I've clipped it pretty close up. And you need to take a little clip in the front point. That's very important. It tells you how to do that in the pattern. Then we're going to go over to the iron, and you've got to give it a really good press now. That's going to help it lay flat. So I've already gone over and pre-pressed this a bit just so I could show you how. And so you just keep working with it, maneuver it, flatten this point out right here. If it's not flattening for you, that means you don't have it clipped good enough. So just go back to the instructions and have another look. But that's what my facing is going to look like. Then I'm going to top stitch it down. I like to top stitch my facing. Sometimes I use contrasting thread. I've just been using like a bone colored thread because it just goes really well with this fabric. And what I'm going to do is do 2 rows of top stitching there, which is very similar to what I did on this dress here. It just helps hold your facing down. I added a little bit of my selvage to my facing just as an embellishment so that when it's hanging on the hanger, I can see that, yes, this is Tula Pink Tiny Beasts. So then the next step is, how are you going to finish your sleeves? Are you going to do the sleeveless version, which is a nice cap sleeve like this, or you have an option of adding a bit of a sleeve to it. This is the first time that I've added the sleeve, and so I'm kind of excited about that. I've used 2 different prints from Tiny Beasts. I made sure that my sleeve is directional so that when it's laying on my arm like this, my hedgehogs are facing down, they're standing up. So there's instructions. You just sew the sleeve. If you're going to put the sleeve on, you put the sleeve on, right sides together, sew it. You can finish the edge of your sleeve as outlined in the pattern. I chose to do a binding in the same color as the fabric of the dress. I like playing back and forth with color. Then the next thing that we're going to do is to attach the pockets to the side. We're almost done already. So these are our pocket things here, and remember that the pockets hang down so you can put your hand in them. That's how I remember how they're shaped. And so we're going to attach the pockets to both the front and the back. We stitch between points A and B there on all 4 sides, and then we'll be back to show you how to just zip up the whole dress. We're going to sew down the side, finish the hem, and we're done. So the pockets are one of my favorite parts of this dress. I've always got my hands in my pockets, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the technique for putting the pockets in. I love putting a flash of color in the pockets. You can see I've added a little bit of contrast there. That's always fun. That's what I've done in this dress too. So the pockets get sewn onto the side, and again, remember you did those markings. They're very important because now you're just sewing the pocket onto the back and front between the 2 points A and B. Then you're going to stitch your pocket up, right sides together, and I like to go stitch 1 row, then I go and sew about 1/4 inch from that, and then again I'm pinking it, I'm zigzagging it, because your pockets, because we're always in our hands in our pockets, shoving our phone in our pocket, whatever, there's a lot of wear and tear on that pocket. So I'm reinforcing the seam with another seam there. Then we are going to be Again, I just love this technique. We sew from the top of the sleeve or from the edge of the sleeve down the side to the top of the pocket to that point that you marked. We're going to sew that. Then we're going to sew from the bottom part of the pocket that's marked to the bottom hem, and that's it. We're going to make sure that we do some sort of seam finish on there so that doesn't fray. Then we're going to finish the bottom, and that can be as simple as putting a binding on, just like you put a binding on a quilt. So directions are in the pattern, and we'll be back right away with the finished dress. Well, here we are with the finished project. This is the Cocoon Dress, the pattern by Simple Sew, and I used Tula Pink Tiny Beasts. I used some contrasting fabric for the sleeves, tried something different. I've never added sleeves before. I quite like it for the fall look, and I've got contrasting pockets. I've added a little bit of length to the bottom of the dress because I'm just about 6 feet tall, so that's something if you are a tall girl like me, you want to add a little bit of length to yours. So I'll just give you a little bit of a spin here. My favorite part about this dress is the pockets. I just can't say enough about them. So if you like this video, if you'd like, comment and share. If you have any questions, you can add them to the comments below, and we will check back. Have a great day.